So I do read them plainly, but I read them plainly as what they are, which are court
Sure.
tales, which is again it's a very formulaic genre. So what does this mean to me? It seems to us, from a study of each of these stories, that for many of them, there is what we might call a historic inspiration, an episode in the lives of some Judean exiles that preserves a memory, a core of some remarkable event that occurred. Some of them are in Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Some of them are probably related to a king called Nabonidus, who's a much lesser known
Hmm.
Babylonian king. And the way that we see this is if you look at some of the features of the story. So, for instance, in Daniel 3, um, Nabonidus was a king who uh, initiated the worship of a new god, Sin. Well, not a new god, Sin already existed, but he made him the head of the pantheon, unseated Marduk, essentially. And one of the things that Nabonidus did was build this cult statue of Sin and moved it from Babylon to the temple in Haran, where he was going to take up residence, this
Hmm.
deity. Um, and so we and many scholars say, okay, Daniel 3 might be remembering this event, but then formulating that event in the parameters of a familiar story model. So we're familiar with story models today, right? We have you've got like the romantic comedy model where, there's a meet cute and then there's some kind
Sure.
of relational tension and then they get together in the end. And this is both something that we can use for purely fictional stories. You can make up a rom-com, but it's also a way that we often end up telling our own stories that are historical because those patterns are in our mind. So like when you're like, tell
Hmm.
me about your relationship, you have in your mind, well, there's when we met, right? Maybe there's some turmoil that we went through, maybe not. And then there's like the moment when we realized we loved each other, and then the moment we got married. Yes. And that's how
Yeah.
you tell your romantic stories. That's totally cultural. That's totally culturally determined. And so there can be things that both have a historical strand to them, but are also cast into these story forms that actually determine the way that we see these stories.
Hmm.
And with something like Daniel 1 through 6, which were clearly popular stories told over and over again over a long period of time, we can see patterns of embellishment is the wrong word, but maybe like embellishment, translation, the addition of new elements that made this story that probably preserves a historical memory that clarifies its message in each period of time.
Hmm.
Can I give one example from Daniel
Yeah,
3?
please.
Because this is something that we don't catch in English translation, but anyone reading the story in Aramaic, it would be one of the most obvious features. So in Daniel 3 is kind of a funny story. Um, but one of the things that we have is those repeated lists. So let me just read. Uh, this is Daniel 3, just in case you don't remember. So King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue whose height was 60 cubits and whose width was 60 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent for the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to assemble and come to the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province assembled for the dedication of the statue. And then a couple of verses later, you are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical
Hmm.
ensemble, and this is repeated several times. And you can
Yeah.
just imagine that this is part of the energy of the storytelling, right? We don't
Yeah.
actually have missives from Nebuchadnezzar and Nabonidus that are like listing every single kind of governor and every single kind of instrument. This is clearly kind of fun embellishment. You can picture a
Interesting.
storyteller just listing these one after another in
Yeah,
order
and
to
it
get
comes
the
out
kids
more when
riled
you
up.
read it.
Yeah,
I think
totally.
when you say it out loud, when you read it,
Totally.
I think you see it. You see it, skip, or you just read it
Right.
quickly.
You
It's
just
like whatever.
exactly.
Yeah.
Um, but if you look at it in Aramaic, something else that's interesting about these lists is the lists are made up of loan words from other languages. And each list is made up of majority loan words from a particular language. Let me give an example. So that first list, the satraps, prefects, governors, etc., that is majority Persian loan words. So it's, if you were reading it, it would sound foreign, right? I'm trying to think of loan words in English. This is so
Like a rendezvous, maybe.
yeah. So if you're like, we have to rendezvous and respondez s'il vous plaît and
Right.
you you would hear it. You'd be like, wait, especially if you did it again and again and again and again.
Yeah,
Because
in a
we have
list.
loan words that have become part of our language, but you'd be like, oh, you're making some kind of comment about the French.
Right.
Then the musical instruments are majority Greek loan words. And it's really noticeable because I think you mentioned you'll be taking Hebrew. Hebrew has a very kind of set structure, and this is Aramaic, which is very similar to Hebrew. One of the little tips is if you add Aramaic to your Hebrew, you can say you know two languages, and they're very similar to each other. Little professional tip. But these are, with the exception of the horn, are not familiar Semitic roots. They're very clearly loanwords and they're majority Greek.
Interesting.
Later on, one final list that we get is the list of the clothing that they wear when they're thrown into the fire. Let's see. I'm just reading the NRSV. It says their tunics, their trousers, their hats, and their other garments. These are loanwords from Scythian, which is a distinctive mode of dress that the Persians borrowed from their neighbors, the Scythian. It became very fashionable in Persian time periods. So we have these guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're dressed like Scythians, which is like a very distinctive mode of dress. You would not expect it. And it specifies in the text that way. They are gathered with Persian officials listening to Greek instruments. Yes.
Even
These are
though they're in this is closer to Daniel from 570
exactly,
BC.
even though it's set in the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. So
Interesting.
you see this fun literary detail that's actually hinting at the truth that we just heard in Daniel 2, which is that we got the head of gold, it's Babylon, and then we're going to have Persia, and then we're going to have Media,
Yeah.
and then we're going to have
Some things. Yeah, some things never change.
So Nebuchadnezzar is actually worshiping his statue to the tune of an empire that's going to take him over.
Oh, interesting.
Right? So this isn't historical, right? This isn't saying, and in Babylon, they mostly listen to Greek instruments, right? This is a little hidden code that would help the audience enjoy this story, right? You can just imagine them kind of chuckling.
Yeah.
It's a literary feature that conveys a message. At
So
Nebuchadnezzar's
this would be,
expense.
I want to stick on this point. This is so interesting. And especially the clothing, I think, is like a dead giveaway.
Isn't that funny? Yes.
This would be like, I'm trying to think of an analogy. It would be like if you were, say you were writing a story and you were trying to argue against consumerism or materialism.
Yeah.
It would be like putting George Washington in Air Jordans.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes, totally.
Yes.
Totally. Exactly.
So as soon as you hear that, but when you translate it, then it all looks the same.
That's right.
So in the English, you lose that.
That's right. John Adams is coming along with like an electric guitar, and like it's funny and it's saying something, and it's saying something true, but it isn't history because that isn't what it is.
Right.
It's
interesting.
A fun, funny court tale genre. And again, we're not making this decision based off of like, well, of course they couldn't get rescued from the flames.
Sure.
We're making this decision based off of like, okay, what literary techniques do we see here in the story? And that's a pattern that I think we see. So I think we have historical episodes behind most of these stories that we can discern. But the stories themselves are not designed to be history. Like back in 555 BCE, this happened. They're designed to be stories that travel across time, that are paradigms, not only for how Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego lived in Babylon and how God rescued them in this moment. They're meant to be patterns that inspire faithful behavior, both in situations where God does miraculously rescue and when God doesn't. And that's the point of Daniel 3, when they say, yeah, our God can rescue. And even if God doesn't matter, right? Whether God rescues or not, we are going to be faithful even to the point of death. And so these really entertaining stories are designed to promote that stance.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so fascinating. I love the examples are very helpful.
Yeah,
And I appreciate your articulation too of not dismissing it on the grounds of it being improbable,
totally.
but
Right.
saying, listen, I'm just trying to read it
Exactly.
faithfully as was written down.
Exactly.
Not because, like you said it well, it's not that they couldn't survive the fiery
Yeah.
furnace. In fact, I think the story is trying to invite the reader to say, look,
Yes.
God could really do this.
Yeah.
Like believe and be
Yeah.
encouraged that this could
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
It's similar. I think I've been doing work on Jonah. I get the
Yeah.
same impression from Jonah.
Yeah.
When you
Totally.
read that book, it seems to really be trying to give you the impression that this could really happen,
Yeah.
that God could do it.
Sure.
And then it almost, the question of whether it actually happened fades a little bit.
Totally.
Because if it could happen and it could happen again, that's really the point, that God has the power to do that.
Yeah.
Just like how, and then you pair that with, I'm getting on a tangent now, but you pair it with something like Jesus calming the storm.
That's right.
You say, look,
That's right.
God clearly has the power to control the weather
That's
and
right.
nature and things. And
Totally.
so then your question of what is it trying to teach us? What is
Exactly.
it trying to teach me through
Exactly.
time is actually more important.
And I think it can lead us, because the point, it can lead us to sometimes miss the message, because the point of Daniel 3 is not God will rescue you from the fiery furnace.
Hmm.
It totally isn't. Especially if you think about the historical transmission of Daniel, where Daniel is read to a group of people who saw the Jerusalem temple burn, who lost family members in the siege of Jerusalem, and God did not intervene. It's also written for those who saw Cyrus miraculously decide to send the exiles back to Jerusalem with the supplies to build the temple. It's also written to those who are suffering under Antiochus IV Epiphanes and aren't seeing God save everybody, as it's written for us today, where we see the same thing. Right? There are times when God acts miraculously to heal, to provide, to bring life, to direct, to make
Yep.
God's will clear. And then there are times when God does not heal or rescue, where God doesn't provide in the ways that we want him to provide. Yes? And so Daniel 3 is a story that's written for all of those time periods, to say God can do this, but also God is there in Babylon, clearly, the fourth person in the fire. And even if God doesn't, God is still worthy of our loyalty and worship. And so it's actually a story that works for both contexts, which is just so nuanced and true and
Yeah.
affirmed in the rest of Scripture. Yes?